Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right. Well, I guess that's it. The recording said I was here, so I'm here. Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, September 24th, 2021. The guy on the radio here said I got to do a show, so I'm ready to do it. All right, let's see. It's Friday. I think I might be able to make it through all the way. It's a tough haul. 2 hours solo. You know, that's a Friday thing, and it's tough under normal circumstances. But, all right, I think I've got the cold. Well, it's not gone. Definitely still have it. Got a test, in case any of you were wondering. I actually went out and took a PCR test, and it's negative. So that's good news. Justice, who has got COVID, is going to try and do a show today following this. So I figure I have to try it, right? That guy's got COVID. He's doing a show. I don't. I guess I better show up. So here we go. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. This is the big news of the day. Bill knows it, so he tweets it along. The Cyber Ninjas report comes out this afternoon, officially, but everyone has seen it apparently already. And he says, Kagro X, me, David Waldman, has tentatively lined up an exclusive interview with the loose-lipped bamboo fiber. Okay, that's not a bad idea. Let's see if we can get one of the bamboo fibers on the show. I think by now, most of you who are up and paying attention to the news, or who are up late paying attention to the news yesterday, have heard that the preliminary, leaks, embargoed copies of the report. I don't know who got what. Nothing's verified yet because, cyber ninjas, anything could happen, I guess. But word is that the cyber ninjas finally out with their report. Remember, this thing was due in May, I think. It is now, what did I say at the beginning of the show? September. So I don't know, let's say the end of May. So June, July, August, and most of September. 4 months late. By the way, I checked up on coronavirus numbers last night as well. Another big milestone passed. According to Worldometers, anyway, now well above 700,000 dead. And that comes to mind because I looked back to see when did we pass 600,000. And it was about the time the Cyber Ninjas report was due. So the lateness of the Cyber Ninjas report encompassed an additional 100,000 deaths from coronavirus. Not that the two are necessarily related, but they were caused by the same person, I suppose. But anyway, neither here nor there. So anyway, the word is that Cyber Ninja's conclusion is, hey, nothing really happened here in Maricopa County. Their report allegedly will confirm Joe Biden's victory in Maricopa County, Arizona. And in fact, their audit came very close to, the official audit count. Their fraud audit got almost the same numbers, but there was a difference, and the difference results in a net gain of votes for Joe Biden. So, I don't know how they're feeling about that. Probably pretty stupid, but I don't know. They ought to be familiar with the feeling, but I don't think they know exactly what it is. I've felt this before, but I don't have a name for it. Probably what's happening over there. We got some articles on it. We should read through it. There's lots more to get to, of course, plus a couple of updates on older stories and stories I've been promising you all week. When I say updates on older stories, I mean specifically one story on which I have a brief update. Listener John Ronald, who very frequently chimes in with comments and contributions via email and Twitter, said, actually guessing that perhaps Darwin had already contacted me about this one, but Darwin has not, and that's okay. Maybe he's sick this week. Maybe he missed that show. Maybe he just thought, not that important. Whatever it is, it's okay. I like to have contributions coming from other people every once in a while, too. That's great. He's pointing out that I had been confused about the reference to the island on the aircraft carrier, all aircraft carriers, but this aircraft carrier was the Gerald R. Ford, the one that came, one of many, but the one in this story that came in for criticism from Donald Trump over the aesthetics of its planned construction. And John reminds me, of course, and it was in mind, but it didn't become part of the story, that there was a time when Trump seemed bound and determined to change the way the United States Navy built its aircraft carriers, to go back to the old steam-powered catapults that help launch the aircraft off of the deck. He was in favor of the old steam version versus the new and improved computer-controlled electromagnetic catapults, which are high-tech, but I guess he heard somewhere, well, they're high-tech, so they break a lot. We should go back to the old steam ones. And it's not entirely clear whether the steam ones were ever any better, or whether they actually have the power to launch modern aircraft, or whether it takes up too much space below decks to power it with the steam, or whatever. I don't know. But apparently the electromagnetic ones are a vast improvement. The Navy thinks so at all ranks, and they basically ignored him, which, we were hoping would pretty much be the case. But I guess he moved on at that point to criticizing the aesthetics of the aircraft carriers. He didn't like where they put the island. And the only explanation in the article was that the island had been located at this particular point on this particular craft, I think in accordance with the construction of all, I assume, new aircraft carriers, put in a position that, wonder of wonders, was chosen so that it would be easier for the pilots of the planes, large part of the function of an aircraft carrier, would have an easier time of landing on the craft. But Trump said, to hell with that. We don't care if they land. I like the look of the ship when the island is over here. So what's the island? I had no idea. And I don't know whether I would have guessed otherwise, but I was also thrown off by the fact that Trump then goes on to complain about, I know all about construction, and I know all about elevators. And elevators, they don't work when you get water on them. Everybody knows that. And I thought, what would an island be that also involves an elevator and could get water on it? And my only guess was maybe it was the mechanism by which they raised aircraft up to the flight deck if they were below deck for whatever reason. And that, I don't know, something. It made no sense to me. And it still makes no sense. But the true answer, according to John here, is that the island is just sort of shorthand for the control tower on the flight deck. The place where if you're drinking coffee and Maverick requests permission to do a flyby and you deny him that permission because the flight pattern is full, but he zooms by anyway and you go, oh, and you spill your coffee. If it's happening on an aircraft carrier, that's the island. And I guess they have some options about where they place the island on the ship in relation to the flight deck. And apparently, he doesn't like where they put it. The Navy likes where they put it. That's the entirety of the argument. That's it. Elevators don't come into it. Water doesn't come into it, except insofar as it's on a ship. I don't know what he's doing. He's just babbling about something. Much like the first 9 minutes or 10 minutes of this show. But, I'm not taking federal dollars in order to do the show. So, if I was, then we'd be on a parallel. Okay, so I thought I would correct that. That seemed kind of interesting. Cyber ninjas, a little less so, but here's the official report. I grabbed something from Arizona sources on this, so you can find it at azcentral.com, which, by the way, would also like you to know there's a fall sale on $1 for 6-month subscription. That sounds pretty good, plus access to the USA Today crossword. I hope they'll pay me for that ad. I feel bad about not subscribing to all these papers all the time. It's sometimes, when everything's just $1 and everything, but I don't know how many papers I'd have to subscribe to not hit any paywalls. All right, well, I'm just a regular cheap American, so I'll read the AZ Central report for free today. No disrespect meant to Jen, Fifield and Robert Anglin. No doubt, honest folks just trying to make a good honest day's pay at the Arizona Republic, even without my dollar. hand count in audit, they just say regular old audit, affirms Biden beat Trump. Ta-da! As Maricopa County said in November. So it was a huge waste of time and money and an embarrassment for Republicans in Arizona. Even though they were horribly embarrassed by all of this and were basically encouraging insurrectionism because of this, for whatever reason, alleged Democrat Kyrsten Sinema is desperate to get their votes by showing everybody that she's a confounding influence and a contrarian among Democrats, just like good old John McCain. Look what happened to him. But okay. Anyway, a months-long hand recount of Maricopa County's 2020 vote confirmed that President Joe Biden won. Breaking news, everybody. And the election was not, quote, stolen from former President Donald Trump, according to early versions of a report prepared for the Arizona Senate. The 3-volume report by the Cyber Ninjas, the Senate's lead contractor, includes results that show Trump lost by a wider margin than the county's official election results. The data in the report also confirms that U.S. Senator Mark Kelly won in the county. And by the way, remember we read the other day about the big name idiots that contributed somehow through some probably not terribly legal means, $500,000 and upwards in the neighborhood of that kind of money to try and fund this thing. Because you'll recall the Arizona Senate somehow thought it was only going to cost them $150,000 to do a months-long audit of this thing. And, of course, they overran the costs, but Republican donors swooped in to waste their money on it, and there you go. Ha-ha. And I wish they had set the rest of their money on fire. The official results are set to be presented to the Senate at 1 p.m. Friday. I guess that's Arizona time, so well after this show airs. But, by the afternoon, you'll have heard the official results, I guess. Several versions of the draft report titled Maricopa County Forensic Audit by Cyber Ninjas. By Cyber Ninjas. The end, at the end, it says. Circulated prematurely on Wednesday and Thursday. That's a leak, I guess. Multiple versions were obtained by the Arizona Republic. That's interesting. Multiple versions or, multiple copies of the same version. I'm curious whether they really meant versions or not. I guess that means it could still change. It's in flux. The Cyber Ninjas and their contractors were paid millions somehow, even though the contract was for $150K, to research and write the report by nonprofits set up by prominent figures in the, quote, Stop the Steal movement and allies of Donald Trump. But Cyber Ninjas CEO Doug Logan said that would not influence their work. In other words, the checks have cleared, the money's in my bank account, and I don't care what you say. That's nice. He stole the money, but that's nice that he's not going to be influenced by it. I guess count your blessings. 1. I'm done. The draft reports reviewed by the Republic minimize the ballot counts and election results and instead focus on issues that raise questions about the election process and voter integrity. Voter integrity definitely gets the dramatic music. We all know what that means. We are concerned that black and brown people voted, and we have to find a way to stop that because they tend to vote for the people we didn't want to win. So, yeah, I did note in some of the reports yesterday that they're bending over backwards to try to find some benefit for the Republicans who paid for this audit. And they're basically saying, well, there's still questions. We've only settled the question of Maricopa County, for instance. What about the rest of Arizona? Maybe the steal was elsewhere. And, they have a report here that says it pretty much went as they said it went. As a matter of fact, if anything, it was even a larger win for Joe Biden. But we definitely have to do something about all the fraudulent votes we didn't find and all the wrong counts that we didn't find. We need to legislate against those things that didn't happen, because if we do that, then the thing we saw happen might not happen. And that was really what this was all about. We didn't want this to happen. The election analysts, or rather, real election analysts, say those findings That is the attempt to try to get something out of the audit and say there are questions now about election process and voter integrity. Election analysts say those findings are misleading and built on faulty data, like the whole audit. I can't believe it. The draft report shows there were less than 1,000 vote difference between the county's certified ballot count and the Cyber Ninja's hand count. The hand count shows Trump received 45,469 fewer votes than Biden. The county results showed that Trump had lost by 45,109. So what is that? 360 additional votes found for Biden. Poor Joe Biden, who knew that he had been shortchanged in the count. And thank God the Cyber Ninjas stepped in and set fire to Pillow Guy's money and Sidney Powell's money. And the end result was, oh, wow, Biden won by even more. Maricopa County Board Chairman Jack Sellers said the overall results in the draft report confirm, quote, the tabulation equipment counted the ballots as they were designed to do, and the results reflect the will of the voters, unquote. That should be the end of the story, he said. Everything else is just noise. Logan declined to comment through his spokesperson, Rod Thompson. The draft report comes in 3 parts, adding up to about 110 pages. It includes recommended changes to the state elections law. I'd love to see what their recommendations are. And suggestions for how the county should correct certain election processes, including how to keep voter information updated, ballot handling, and voting machine security. That's a very nervy recommendation to make, given that they spoiled the voting machines in their audit. But I'm sure they know. Well, step 1 could be don't give them to Cyber Ninjas. That would be a valid report. It recommends that a few concerns be investigated by the Arizona Attorney General. Okay, sure. Tom Liddy, the deputy Maricopa County attorney, on Thursday provided the Republic with a copy of a document the county received. That might be their draft. Who knows? Liddy said he could not verify the document he had was an official Cyber Ninjas document, if there is such a thing, because the county did not get it from the Senate. He declined to say who provided it to the county, but said that someone dropped it off Wednesday at the Maricopa County Attorney's office. It could all be a false flag. I should switch over to that mode. That's much more profitable, I understand. Benny White, a prominent Pima County elections consultant, also provided a line-by-line analysis of a draft report he received. It had no connection with the county. I'm not certain what that means exactly, but okay. There was no connection with the report on Pima County's results. It's just he happens to be from neighboring Pima County and a prominent elections consultant, and he got a copy of the report too. The presidential and U.S. Senate results in the document provided to the county match with White's copy. He did not provide the Republic with the copy he had, but he verbally confirmed that the results were the same. Okay. So just checking. The presidential and Senate results from the recount were found in the 3rd volume of the draft. The 1st volume, the executive summary, focuses on pointing out concerns Cyber Ninja and its subcontractors have with the county's election, raising questions about whether there was election fraud, and further casting doubt on the integrity of the process. After they lost a court battle and had to hand over election materials to the Senate earlier this year, county officials did not participate in the audit and did not answer most of the questions the Senate's contractors had about the county's election processes. The contractors had no prior election experience other than their involvement with the Stop the Steal movement. Election consultants from across the country warned before the release of the results to be skeptical of the findings because they say the methods were sloppy, insecure, lacked bipartisan oversight, and were unlikely to produce accurate results. Those who obtained copies of the draft report were already dissecting it. White said the Senate is raising bogus concerns in a way that will shift focus from the fact that the audit found Trump lost the election by numbers that closely matched the county's. I'm outraged at what the Senate has done, what it is doing here, he said on Thursday. They have not involved any elections officials in the audit. They have not involved any county officials. White is part of a three-man team dubbed the Audit Guys, who have analyzed election and voting processes nationwide. He said his team is preparing a rebuttal to the report that will demonstrate section by section how the cyber ninjas got it wrong. Not that Trump won, but that they got the numbers right and everything else wrong, I guess. The ninjas don't understand Arizona's voting laws, he said. That seems a shortcoming. They don't understand the structure of voting systems. He called out the draft report's failure to provide specific breakdowns of the count in the report, including key voting elements such as boxes, batches, and precinct information that would allow experts to burrow into the data. We've demonstrated in the past that if they produce those counts, we are going to destroy those reports, he said. Okay. They have wasted $6 to $7 million and months of people's time on something that is just not credible. One of the most significant problems is the cyber ninjas' reliance on a commercial database to verify voters, White said. He called the methodology sloppy and said experts who do this for a living instead would use the data directly from the county recorder's office, not data from a third party. That's a good question as to why they did that. White disputes Senate President Karen Fann's claim that she launched the audit to provide or to improve election integrity. He said the draft report went out of its way to ensure findings would raise doubts about the process when the counts didn't show fraud. It was a conspiracy to keep Donald Trump in power by extra-constitutional means, he said. Sellers said he suspects the supervisors will be, quote, accused once again of not cooperating, failing to fill holes in the knowledge of the Senate's chosen contractor. How could we cooperate with an inquiry that was led by people who have no idea how to run an election, let alone one in the second largest voting district in the United States, he said. The board approved the election plan. We hired and supported our election experts, and they produced a well-run and accurate election in accordance with Arizona law. That's it. That's the end of the article. And that's the end of the show, everybody. Might as well take off now. So there's what the locals are reading, I guess, if everybody's reading the Arizona Republic this morning about what happened. So, pretty straightforward. They counted and they couldn't find anything. This, so far, though, has not stopped the effort to undertake exactly the same sort of approach in several other states at the direction of Republican legislatures. But maybe this will slow the momentum a little bit, but you know, it's not like logic is going to have anything to do with it. All right, a couple of other fun stories parked in pocket that we need to get to, and do want to get around to that Facebook story that's been lingering. We only have a couple of minutes here before we take off for the first break, so let's make the next story be this one, which can be summarized very quickly if we happen to run out of time. Lauren Bobert doesn't know what she's doing and is therefore making huge mistakes with the way she spends her campaign money. She's been accused of things like this already in the past, and now she's in trouble for what appears to be a new one. I'm not sure, but it might be that let's see if the Denver Post will let me read the story. They won't. All right, well, that just as well. I mean, look, you should pay them if they're going to do a nice story. I'll give you the headline. Lauren Bobert paid rent and utilities, like on her house, I guess, with campaign funds, according to FEC filings. Republican Congresswoman later reimbursed her campaign when she found out it was wrong for $6,650. I wonder if look at that. They don't have the kind of firewall that prevents Pocket from reading the story, so that's my evil laugh when I have a cold. Anyway, Republican U.S. Representative Lauren Bobert paid rent and utility bills with campaign funds in violation of federal campaign finance laws. New filings with the FEC show. That wording makes me think she paid someone else's utilities. The filings submitted to the FEC on Tuesday also indicate that Bobert reimbursed her campaign for the $6,650 worth of payments. Representatives for the Congresswoman could not immediately be reached for comment. Each of the four payments in question, two for $2,000 each and another two for $1,325 each, were amended to show payments for the same amount, description, and on the same days to John Pacheco. Doesn't sound like a utility company at all. John Pacheco, he could be the rent, whose address is the same as, Shooter's Grill and Rifle, which Bobert owns. Pacheco's relationship to Bobert was not immediately clear, so she was paying rent and utilities on the restaurant that she runs, which is also bad, but paying it to John Pacheco for some reason. The latest discrepancy appeared in a July campaign finance report for the committee Lauren Bobert for Congress. Payments to Venmo were described as personal expense of Lauren Bobert billed to campaign account in error. Expense has been reimbursed. The next month, FEC officials asked the campaign for clarification on the error. Bobert spokesman Jake Settle told Forbes that he would describe the payments as personal expenses. If the payments were personal use of campaign funds, the commission may consider taking further legal action, says FEC senior campaign finance analyst Shannon Ringgold in the August letter to Bobert's campaign. However, prompt action to obtain reimbursement of the funds in question will be taken into consideration. Bobert's supplemental report filed Tuesday reiterated that the expenses had been reimbursed and will be reported with the campaign's next filing due in October. In February, the Denver Post reported that Bobert was paid more than $22,000 in mileage reimbursements, which would have meant she drove 38,712 miles in 2020 during a stretch of the pandemic where travel was limited. Bobert's campaign letter filed an amended report to the FEC claiming the Congresswoman received $21,200 in reimbursements for mileage, travel expenses, and hotel stays. More than $17,000 of that still went to mileage, though, so a little odd.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. It makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see what else is coming up here. All right. Other stories possibly developing. Keeping an eye on those things. Let's finish up with Lauren Bobert. We're almost done with this thing. As a matter of fact, there's only one brief little paragraph left. So we learned that at some point earlier she was paid more than $22,000 in mileage reimbursements, and the numbers didn't match up. Then a later amended report knocked it down to $21,000 and said that it was both travel and hotel, mileage, travel, and hotel reimbursement, but that still $17,000 of the $21,000 went to mileage, which still seems impossible. And in August, the Associated Press reported Bobert had not divulged during her campaign that her husband made $478,000 as an oil and gas consultant in 2020. She filed that information with the House of Representatives several months into her first term. So, not really getting the hang of the whole reporting and disclosure thing. Not very much of a surprise for Lauren Bobert, but what can you do? All right, let's see. Other exciting, possibly exciting news. Washington Post reporting yesterday, Biden White House leans toward releasing information about Trump and the January 6th attack, setting off legal and political showdown. Yes, sounds pretty interesting and worthy of some analysis. Tom Hamburger and Jacqueline Almany, I'm guessing A-L-E-M-A-N, Alemany, like I'll have many ales, Alemany or Almany. Alemany, perhaps, I don't know. I'll ask Jackie sometime. Can I call you Jackie? All right. Well, I can't say your last name, so I'm asking, can I call you Jackie? Because I can't even say Jacqueline correctly. The White House is leaning toward releasing information to Congress about what Donald Trump and his aides were doing during the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, despite the former president's objections, a decision that could have significant political and legal ramifications. Yes, it could. Here's why. Trump said he will cite, quote, executive privilege to block information requests from the House Select Committee investigating the events of that day, banking on a legal theory that has successfully, yes, allowed presidents and their aides to avoid or delay congressional scrutiny for decades, including during the Trump administration. But President Biden's White House plans to err on the side of disclosure, given the gravity of the events of January 6th, according to two people familiar with the discussions who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe the private discussions. I assume they're going to get into this somewhere in the article, but if you're asking yourself, wow, what executive privilege? He's not the executive anymore. The answer is, well, for a very long time among the suit-wearing class, it was considered worthwhile, chiefly by the people in the Office of Legal Counsel and the White House counsel's office, to preserve and to allow ex-presidents the same privilege because it was generally bad for the office of the presidency, which they then occupied, to poke holes in the executive privilege theory. And that even if it were just the case that it's no longer available to you once you've left office, well, your successor could then pull the same trick on you, and you wouldn't like that very much, would you? And that was really all there was to the trick. Now, of course, I think we face a quantum difference in kind of presidency that we're viewing here in the rearview mirror, thankfully. But apparently that's a difficult argument to make legally speaking. So let's continue here. In response to questions about White House deliberations over what information to release, Biden spokesman Michael J. Gwynn, Gwin, Gwynn, said the president views the attack on the Capitol as a, quote, dark stain on our country's history. Yeah, sure. And is, quote, deeply committed to ensuring that something like that can never happen again. And he supports a thorough investigation. These are, again, fine sentiments, but what do they mean in terms of the historical impact of a current president denying a former president the access to or the validity of an executive privilege claim? We'll see whether they get into that. Members of the investigative committee argue that Trump no longer enjoys the protection of executive privilege, encouraging the White House to push aside institutional concerns about sharing information with Congress and aid the panel in an investigation focused on what Democrats and a handful of Republicans have called an assault on democracy. And it was, and it seems like maybe it's a little extraordinary and you should be given a little more leeway in getting to the bottom of it. But again, that's not much of a legal argument. That's kind of a, well, we feel that way. It's not really relevant because there's no president involved. There's no such thing as former president's executive privilege, said Representative Jamie Raskin, a committee member who teaches constitutional law. That's extremely dilute and not really relevant, although I think there is such a thing. But again, it's usually based on a very different kind of relationship with a former president than this twice impeached, ousted one who still insists that he's the only legitimate president and needs to be reinstated. I mean, you kind of have to flush that twice, if you know what I mean. What Trump was doing while the attack was occurring and who he was speaking with are among the big unanswered questions concerning the assault on the Capitol. The debate over the validity of his executive privilege claim comes as the committee is moving into a new and more aggressive phase of its investigation, having requested material from telecom, social media companies, and the White House, and receiving some response. It is now looking at how best to compel testimony and documents from those reluctant to participate. Committee Chairman Benny Thompson of Mississippi, in case you forget where he's from, it's always nice to remind everybody, said this week that his panel will soon issue subpoenas to witnesses and organizations, adding that the committee has started scheduling closed-door testimony with cooperative witnesses. On Thursday night, the committee issued subpoenas to former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, former Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino, former Pentagon official Kash Patel, and longtime Trump advisor Stephen K. G.B. Bannon. The committee is seeking documents as well as testimony from the four men, as well as a couple of Steve Bannon shirts, probably. Trump has derided the committee's work as partisan and is promising to fight its efforts to collect information and testimony related to the attack. The highly partisan, communist-style select committee, someone wrote for him, has put forth an outrageously broad records request that lacks both legal precedent and boobs. That was the original draft. It scratched out, lacks both legal precedent and legislative merit, Trump spokesman. Oh, shoot, it was all superfluous. I thought that was a little fancy for him, but it was Trump spokesman Taylor Budowich. That's a weird name, Budowich. Budowich, not like Buddha sandwich or anything like that. But Taylor Budowich. Sure, Taylor. Anyway, executive privilege. Maybe he sounds like Trump. Executive privilege, I don't know, will be defended not just on behalf of President Trump and his administration, but also on behalf of the office of the President of the United States and the future of our nation. It's a good statement. In response to the House panel's request, the National Archives has already identified hundreds of pages of documents from the Trump White House relevant to its inquiry. As required by statute, the material is being turned over to the Biden White House and to Trump's lawyers for review. The committee's August 25th letter to the National Archives was both sweeping and detailed, asking for all documents and communications within the White House on January 6, 2021, relating in any way to the events of that day. That is sweeping. They include examining whether the White House or Trump allies worked to delay or halt the counting of electoral votes, and whether there was discussion of impeding the peaceful transfer of power. The letter also asked for call logs, schedules, and meetings for a large group, including Trump's adult children, son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner, and First Lady Melania Trump, as well as a host of aides and advisors such as his attorney, Rudolph W. Giuliani. The committee has focused in part on seeking information about whether the Trump White House and members of Congress played any role in encouraging the demonstrations, which interrupted the constitutionally mandated certification of electoral votes and unleashed a series of violent confrontations with the U.S. Capitol Police. So far, more than 650 people have been charged with crimes in connection with the violent demonstration that delayed the vote. Many were charged with obstructing a federal procedure and for knowingly entering and remaining in a restricted building. Documents and testimony could show whether White House officials and members of Congress encouraged or supported those actions, congressional staffers said. The White House documents requested by the panel are identified by National Archives personnel and then sent to Biden and Trump lawyers. The first tranche was sent out on August 31st, according to a person familiar with the transfer. Trump has 30 days following the delivery of the documents to decide whether to object to their release, according to the statute. Even if he opposes turning them over, the Biden White House has decision-making authority and can release them over Trump's objections after an additional 60 days has elapsed. I guess we're in that period now. Trump's remaining option would be to go to court, where he does great every time, to try to halt the release, legal advisors said. And he might do better in court this time. So let's see. They were turned over August 31st, and he has 30 days following the delivery, so that would be like October 1st or so, right? Or there's 30 days in September, so yeah, I don't know whether it matters like what time of day or whatever, but somewhere between September 30th and October 1st, somewhere around government shutdown time, as a matter of fact, you would, I guess you'd pass that 30-day thing, and then that would start the 60-day clock, wherein, or after which, Biden would have the authority to override Trump's objections. So take all of October and all of November, so somewhere in December we might get a decision. While Trump has struck a defiant tone, his options may be limited if Biden decides to hand over the information the former president says should be protected, according to several legal experts, including those who have reviewed similar requests in the past. The law we have is not favorable to the former president, said Bob Bauer, who served as White House counsel under President Barack Obama. A former president has a chance to review the materials, to raise issues of privilege, and if the former and the current presidents cannot reach some agreement, to take the dispute to courts. Bauer added that while an inquiry into a former president is unique, legal precedents suggest disclosure of the information Congress is seeking. The circumstances here, the former president, acting at the time in his capacity as a candidate seeking to challenge his defeat at the polls, makes this uphill battle much, much tougher, he said. It wasn't even anything official, no official work going on in all this. So that's true. That's a good point. It'll make it difficult to sustain a claim of executive privilege when he wasn't really functioning as the chief executive at the time. He was functioning as a candidate in a campaign. Norm Eisen, a former Obama appointee who advised the first House impeachment inquiry of Trump, said the former president's power to assert executive privilege has weakened since he left the White House, along with everything else. The executive privilege stonewalling that Trump used while he was in office won't work anymore, Eisen said, noting that the current president, not the former, has the real decision-making power. A former federal judge who worked on executive privilege issues in the Ronald Reagan White House and the George H.W. Bush Justice Department pointed out that privilege requests do not typically attempt to shield information about potential wrongdoing. Oh, but I think that they do. With a few notable exceptions, very notable, the historical practice has been for presidents to avoid asserting executive privilege to protect from disclosure information that suggests wrongdoing or potential wrongdoing by a president and or his advisors. J. Michael Ludwig, a former U.S. federal judge, said in an email, several cases involving, like he missed Watergate or whatever. That's one of the notable exceptions, I guess. Several cases involving requests for tapes and other records from the Richard Nixon White House provide precedent for release of presidential records when requested by Congress or government agencies. In 1977, the Supreme Court in Nixon v. Administrator of General Services rejected Nixon's privilege claims about White House tapes and documents, embracing the idea that executive privilege is not for the benefit of the president as an individual, but for the benefit of the republic. Legal experts also pointed to recent private talks involving Trump officials and Congress that could provide a path to a resolution that does not involve going to court. They cite the negotiations that occurred between lawyers for Trump, the Justice Department, and the Senate Judiciary Committee investigating claims that a Trump Justice Department official, Jeffrey Clark, had sought to deploy department resources after the election to back Trump's claims of massive voting fraud. In the end, the Biden Justice Department waived executive privilege, and two of Trump's top former Justice Department officials, Jeffrey Rosen and Richard Donahue, sat for interviews with the Senate Judiciary Committee, providing detailed accounts of what happened during the post-election period. The decisions Biden and Trump make about the current records and interview requests will be momentous, said Jonathan Turley. Wow. A professor at George Washington University, also wow, who has written about the protection of White House documents and previously argued that Democrats' impeachment efforts against Trump were misguided uses of congressional power. There is an unbroken tradition of deference by the incumbent presidents to their predecessors, Turley said. In the past, incumbent presidents would generally support their predecessors in restricting access despite partisan differences. It appears we may be poised here to shatter that tradition. And hey, Trump was all about shattering traditions, if nothing else. So it's really homage to Trump, and now Turley likes it. Okay, he doesn't, but we could say that he does, because why not? Who cares what Jonathan Turley's position really is? It doesn't make much difference. All right, let's see. By selecting that article, I have somehow, the new Pocket sort of does this weird thing with certain publications. It will bring you to the original in a different tab. I have to remember to just open a new tab every time instead of turning my Pocket tab into that directly into that article. Okay, let's see. Other things to get to. There are several. Maybe we'll stay on this for a little while, at least until the top of the hour, and then maybe then we can switch over to doing the Facebook focus. There's a couple other similarly focused stories. This is all video. Okay, so we won't do that, but I like the quote that they got from him anyway. Bob Woodward saying on MSNBC interview that the existence of Trump in the presidency was a national security crisis. I agree. But I thought an interesting quote. And, we can't really play the video, I don't think. So, okay. Here's more news from The Guardian. I guess they got the early word about the subpoenas under consideration. And I don't think there's anybody else that got a subpoena or will get one. One additional name on top of Mark Meadows, Dan Scavino, and Steve Bannon is Brad Parscale, being named here in The Guardian's report on this Capitol attack panel, said to be considering subpoenas to Trump White House aides, it says here. And Parscale is included in this, but Bannon isn't named, at least not up top. He might be named further down in the article, but I don't see him so far. All right, so I don't think that anything gets added by reading that one, although I'm sure The Guardian had a fine article on it, but I'll include it in the roundup for you so you can parse through it yourself. Let's see, a couple of other things. Oh, you know what? As a matter of fact, I had put away somewhere, and it's been waiting for some time now, a tweet that had made a good point, I thought, about, since we're on the subject of the insurrection and the investigation into it. Our good Twitter friend, Angry Black Lady, who frequently makes great points about these things, has this playing off a Kyle Cheney tweet from September 15th. On September 15th, Kyle tweets, a 40-year friend of a Capitol police officer reported the officer for disclosing the secure location he evacuated lawmakers to on January 6th. The friend believed the officer was aligned with the rioters, per U.S. Capitol Police disciplinary reports obtained by McClatchy, and pointing to the story in the Miami Herald, which I believe is probably also paywalled, but I remind you that this is the story that we heard a little while back. We heard the general angle on it, that I think they said some 6 Capitol police officers were facing disciplinary action for questionable activity on the day of January 6th, up to and including possibly being pro-rioter and or pro-Trump. And I remind you at this stage, Brian Sicknick, who was in fact killed as a result of the assault on the Capitol, early on we learned that he was something of a Trump supporter himself. I don't know if that colors your perception of what happened to him or not. I mean, I guess it could be said that regardless of his personal disposition, he did his job. But I don't know. It throws a weird twist into things. But I guess maybe, if nothing else, it illustrates the extreme impropriety of other officers being unable or unwilling to do the same. So anyway, there's a screen grab from the Miami Herald story which describes this one a little more closely. The allegation stems from a conversation the officer had with a friend the week after the riot, in which he allegedly revealed information. There goes the screen cap. There we go. Revealed information about the secure location that he helped evacuate lawmakers to during the riot. And you might remember that there was a lot of concern about that. And just to bring us back to the earlier aforementioned Lauren Bobert put herself under suspicion in taking the time during the riot to live tweet the fact that the Speaker of the House was for a while on the floor and then later had been evacuated, like as though she were trying to tell people via social media the exact location of a high-value target in the middle of the riot. The friend, though, of the Capitol Police officer, who is referred to as anonymous in the documents, called the FBI tip line to report the conversation and expressed concerns that the agent subscribed to Trump's election conspiracy theories. So now we see agent. I don't think it's actually it might be a Capitol Police personnel, but it's not standard line cops that we're talking about. I'll see if I can open up the story and take a look at it. But interesting. But the Capitol Police, it could be a Secret Service agent, or it could be, I think, a Capitol Police like protective service. Has its own division where they might refer to their officers as agents. Anyway, I don't want to report a friend of 40 years, but he says enough concerning statements that I feel like I need to do this. He's just fallen into this cult and these beliefs. The documents quote the anonymous friend as saying in a subsequent interview with Capitol Police. That is somewhat concerning, so let's see if we can open the story. I don't know. Miami Herald, the title is Capitol Police Officers Face Discipline for Selfies with Rioters, internal documents show. Brian Lowry having reported this on I don't know. It's updated September 14th. I don't know if that's the original date of publication, but it's not firewalled, so we can kind of take a look at this. But yeah, I guess he is a Capitol Police officer, but must be detailed to the protective services here. The officer, whose name is redacted from the documents, is one of 6 facing disciplinary action related to the riot. You know all about why the riot happened. 3 of the cases recommended for disciplinary action after internal investigations by the Office of Professional Responsibility involved Capitol Police officers who allegedly posed for photos with rioters. According to documents, the law enforcement agency announced Saturday, a couple weeks ago, that its Office of Professional Responsibility had recommended disciplinary action against the 6 officers following 38 internal investigations, but no release of details of the investigations. Is there anything else around this particular instance? I don't think so. But again, what happens here is a protective detail officer is blabbing to people about, one, having been the one to help evacuate lawmakers off of the floor to a secure location, and 2, apparently giving away clues as to where the secure location is. Which, I guess they can, or maybe they must now change the secure location, or maybe they can't. I don't know. It's not wise to have disclosed. But I wanted to cover the comment on it that Imani had made here, angry black lady, pointing out quite correctly. Do you remember when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said on said that one of the Capitol officers, and in one of the interviews afterwards, tell us about what went on that day, that she had said that one of the Capitol officers directing her to a safe location had anger and hostility in his eyes, and she wondered whether he was trying to put her in a vulnerable situation. And she said this, and of course she was mocked by both left and right at the time, but chiefly the right, of course. But yeah, she has her own enemies among those of us on the left. But, people thought she was exaggerating, or he had anger in his eyes. What is that? How can you tell that? You have an anger detector? Well, most people do. It's, as a matter of fact, it's very interesting now that comes up. How could you tell that they're angry? Well, you're not one of those people that say we got to take the masks off kids so that they can see people's facial expressions and see one another because of how important that is in interpreting the meaning of comments and actions, are you? Because that would be weird. But anyway, more to the point, Imani has a great one here. A lot of people owe her an apology. She said she had concerns that she might be being evacuated to a safe location by somebody who wasn't actually on her side, wasn't actually on the side of protecting members of Congress from the mob. And it turns out that apparently is the case. So, yeah, another instance where she maybe owed an apology on that one. I thought that was a great observation and a great comment, and I wanted to save it so I could share it with you. Let's see. Oh, you know what? There are a few other items out here that might be of some interest that might want to squeeze in before the break. And I don't think I can make it all the way through, but this was a fun one. And maybe we'll continue with it afterwards, maybe not. Washington Post reporting on the 21st. Drew Harwell, Craig Timberg, and Hannah Allam with this interesting story. Huge hack reveals embarrassing details of who's behind Proud Boys and other far-right websites. We always did want to know that. Researchers say it will allow them to gain important new insights into how extremists operate online. Sounds pretty good. Epic, E-P-I-K. How they spell it? Epic. Long has been the favorite internet company of the far right, providing domain services to QAnon theorists, Proud Boys, and other instigators of the January 6th attack, allowing them to broadcast hateful messages from behind a veil of anonymity. But that veil abruptly vanished last week when a huge breach by the hacker group Anonymous dumped into public view more than 150 gigabytes of previously private data, including usernames, passwords, and other identifying information of Epic's customers. How about that? Extremism researchers and political opponents have treated the leak as a Rosetta Stone to the far right, helping them to decode who has been doing what with whom over several years. Initial revelations have spilled out steadily across Twitter since news of the hack broke last week, often under the hashtag #EpicFail, with a K, of course. But those studying the material say they will need months and perhaps years to dig through all of it. So we wish them good luck and Godspeed, I suppose, or spaghetti monster speed if you prefer. I'd love to find out what they're able to dig out of this. There's a bit more to the article. We might even return to it. I'll give it another look over the 1 minute, and maybe then Facebook. All right, welcome back now. It's the Kagro in the Morning Show on Roots Radio. Shall we read a little bit more about this just to see what else might come out of this story? I think it's pretty interesting. Well, it's also massive. It says so right here. It's massive. It may be the biggest domain-style leak I've seen, and as an extremism researcher, it's certainly the most interesting, said Megan Squire, a computer science professor at Elon University, who studies right-wing extremism. It's an embarrassment of riches. Stress on the embarrassment. Epic, based in the Seattle suburb of Sammamish, maybe? You tell me how we pronounce that one. Has made its name in the internet world by providing critical web services to sites that have run afoul of other companies' policies against hate speech, misinformation, and advocating violence. Its client list is a roll call of sites known for permitting extreme posts and that have been rejected by other companies for their failure to moderate what their users post. Online records show those sites have included 8chan, which was dropped by its providers after hosting the manifesto of a gunman who killed 51 Muslims in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2019. Gab, which was dropped for hosting the anti-Semitic rants of a gunman who killed 11 people in a Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018. And Parler, which was dropped due to lax moderation related to the January 6th Capitol attack. Every one of them having killed people. Very interesting. Epic also provides services to a network of sites devoted to extremist QAnon conspiracy theories. Epic briefly hosted the neo-Nazi site Daily Stormer in 2019 after acquiring a cybersecurity company that had provided it with hosting services, but Epic soon canceled that contract. Daily Stormer, too extreme for Epic. According to news reports, Epic also stopped supporting 8chan after a short period of time, the company has said. Earlier this month, Epic also briefly provided service to the anti-abortion group Texas Right to Life, whose website, prolifewhistleblower.com, was removed by the hosting service GoDaddy because it solicited accusations about which medical providers might be violating a state abortion ban, for the bounty. An Epic attorney said the company stopped working with the site because it violated company rules against collecting people's private information. Online records show Epic was still the site's domain registrar as of last week, though the digital tip line is no longer available, and the site now redirects to the group's homepage. That's interesting because I guess, yeah, they run afoul of their supposedly libertarian worldview where they say, well, we won't police what you say because libertarianism, but we're also opposed to invasions of privacy because libertarianism, and your site collects personal data and publicizes it. That's a violation of privacy rights. They actually stood by that. Very interesting. Epic founder Robert, really? The guy's name, I assume this is fake? Robert Monster. I mean, what is that? Well, Epic founder Robert Monster's willingness to provide technical support to online monsters, online sanctuaries of the right, the far right, have made him a regular target of anti-extremism advocates who criticized him for using Epic's tools to republish the Christchurch gunman's manifesto and live-streamed video of the killer had made of the slaughter. Monster also used the moment as a marketing opportunity because he's a monster, saying the files were now effectively uncensorable, according to screenshots of his tweets and Gab posts from the time. Monster also urged Epic employees to watch the video, which he said would convince them it was faked, Bloomberg News reported. That's a weird request. Monster has defended his work as critical to keeping the internet uncensored and free, aligning himself with conservative critics who argue that leading technology companies such as Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, and YouTube have gone too far in policing content that they deem inappropriate. And we'll find out later that they didn't go far enough, and in some cases didn't go anywhere at all. Monster did not respond to requests for comment from the Washington Post, but he said in an email to customers 2 days after hackers announced the breach that the company had suffered an, quote, alleged security incident, and asked customers to report back any unusual account activity. You are in our prayers. Today's praying. What do you know? Monster wrote last week, as news of the hack spread, when situations arise where individuals might not have honorable intentions, I pray for them. I believe that what the enemy intends for evil, God invariably transforms into good. Huh? Okay. Blessings to you all. Sounds like maybe he's not 100% familiar with religion, but okay. Since the hack, Epic's security protocols have been the target of ridicule among researchers who've marveled at the site's apparent failure to take basic security precautions such as routine encryption that could have protected data about its customers from becoming public. The files include years of website purchase records, internal company emails, and customer account credentials revealing who administers some of the biggest far-right websites. The data includes client names, home addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, and passwords left in plain readable text. The hack even exposed the personal records from Anonymize, a privacy service that Epic offered to customers wanting to conceal their identity. Pretty bad. Similar failings by other hacked companies have drawn scrutiny from the Federal Trade Commission, this is an interesting angle, which has probed companies such as dating site Ashley Madison for failing to protect their customers' private data from hackers. FTC investigations have resulted in settlements imposing financial penalties and more rigorous privacy standards. Given Epic's boasts about security and the scope of its web hosting, I would think it would be an FTC target, especially if the company was warned but failed to take protective action, said David Vladek, a former head of the FTC's Consumer Protection Bureau, now at Georgetown University Law Center. I would add that the FTC wouldn't care about the content, right-wing or left-wing. The questions would be the possible magnitude and impact of the breach and the representations the company may have made about security. FTC declined to comment, by the way. Researchers pouring through the trove say the most critical findings concern the identities of people hosting various extremist sites and the key role Epic played in keeping material online that might otherwise have vanished from the internet, or at least the parts of the internet that are easily stumbled upon by ordinary users. The company played such a major role in keeping far-right terrorist cesspools alive, said Rita Katz, executive director of SITE, S-I-T-E, Intelligence Group, which studies online extremism. Without Epic, Many extremist communities, from QAnon and white nationalists to accelerationist neo-Nazis, would have had far less oxygen to spread harm, whether that be building toward January 6th or sowing the misinformation and conspiracy theories chipping away at democracy. The breach, first reported by the freelance journalist Stephen Monticelli, was made publicly available for download last week alongside a note from anonymous hackers saying it would help researchers trace the ownership and management of the worst trash the internet has to offer. After the hackers' announcement, Epic initially said it was not aware of any breach, but in a rambling 3-hour live stream last week, this is only 2 hours, Monster acknowledged that there had been a, quote, hijack of data that should not have been hijacked, okay, and called on people not to use the data for negative purposes. If you have a negative intent to use that data, it's not going to work out for you. I'm just telling you, he said. If the demon tells you to do it, the demon is not your friend. This guy might not have it all together. Several domains in the leak are associated with the far-right Proud Boys group, as it turns out, which is known for violent street brawls and involvement in the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and was banned from Facebook in 2018 as a hate group. A Twitter account, Epic Fail Snippet, that is posting unverified revelations from the leaked data, included a thread purporting to expose administrators of the Proud Boys sites. One man, who was identified by name as administrator of a local Proud Boys forum, was said to be an employee of Drexel University in Philly. The university said he hasn't worked at Drexel since November of 2020. He took off to go full-time insurrectionist, I guess. Technology news site The Daily Dot reported that Ali Alexander, a conservative political activist who played a key role in spreading false voter fraud claims about the election, took steps after the January 6th siege to obscure his ownership of more than 100 domains registered to Epic. Nearly half reportedly used variations of the Stop the Steal slogan pushed by Alexander and others. Alexander did not reply to requests for comment from the Daily Dot or from the Post. Extremism researchers urge careful fact-checking to protect credibility, but the data remains tantalizing for its potential to unmask extremists in the who are in public-facing jobs. Emma Best, co-founder of Distributed Denial of Secrets, a nonprofit whistleblower group, said some researchers call the Epic hack the Panama Papers of hate groups, a comparison to the leak of more than 11 million documents that exposed a rogue offshore finance industry. And like the Panama Papers, scouring the files is labor-intensive, with payoffs that could be months away. A lot of research begins with naming names, Best said. There's a lot of optimism and feeling of being overwhelmed and people knowing they're in for the long haul with some of this data. Sounds pretty interesting, and I guess we'll, watch this space, if you will, for clues about what comes out afterward. There's another Proud Boys story in here that maybe we can at least mention before jumping off of this thread and into the Facebook thing. Let's see. There's apparently, where's the report that I saw earlier that the Proud Boys are extraordinarily concerned, and apparently with some good reason to believe, they're concerned that they may have been infiltrated by law enforcement to a large extent. And I'm sure it's very difficult for them to tell because a lot of the infiltration was actually just law enforcement, not with any purpose of arresting any of them, joined the Proud Boys because they were into it. So that too will complicate things. If you find out that some people are infiltrating the organization in order to bring it down, it'll be difficult to tell the difference between them and the people who joined it because they like it. But anyway, that's a possibility hanging out there. Let me see. There's a couple other tweets here that I have to kind of click into to make sure which one is which. But I think that maybe I didn't put that part aside. But one other item here that might be relevant before we jump out of this. Let's see. Well, this is of some interest, I think, too, since we were on the Proud Boys. An article widely shared the other day by the folks at theeditorialboard.com. Do they identify their writers on each of these things or no? I can't tell. Yes, they do. Okay. John Storer, Stoehr, the editor of the editorial board, and maybe the only person on it. For all I know, it might be just this guy's blog, and that's a fun name for it. The biggest media bias that no one is talking about is obscuring a violent Republican crime wave that no one is talking about. The bias toward freedom of choice instead of responsibility. When most people think about bias in news coverage, they usually think of some kind of ideological bent, as if the Post, say, is trying to advance some kind of political agenda with its journalism. While this does apply to right-wing outlets like the Washington Examiner, most of the rest of the press corps isn't ideological, as we would normally understand that word. That doesn't mean there isn't bias, though. The most prominent bias comes from journalists merely doing their jobs. Choices have to be made. Cover this story, not that story. For this reason, not that reason. In these choices, news outlets reveal their bias. The Times, for instance, is not center-left. It's a publication of the very obscenely rich, that is, the American elite. Talking about the New York Times here, of course. When it comes to deciding the news that's fit to print, the elites who work there tend to focus on other elites and what they think, to the exclusion of other points of view, because why be inclusive when you're elite? This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can be, like in the middle of a pandemic. Elites tend to believe they're elite because they're elite. They are deserving of wealth and power, in other words. Never mind that most, though not all, elites were born successful, and never mind that they were born into eliteness on account of governments favoring their families. This context has serious ramifications with respect to political values. Freedom, for elites, isn't rooted in democracy, community, or mutual obligation. Instead, it arises from the absence of coercion, especially by the primary instrument of democracy, community, or mutual obligation, government. Choosing for oneself what's good and right, that's freedom. Fine and dandy, except in the middle of a pandemic. The Washington Press Corps' presumption that freedom is about choice, not responsibility, is warping our shared understanding of the pandemic. In this, the Times isn't alone. On the one hand, the presumption minimizes the damage being done by those who refuse to wear masks, or especially refuse to get vaccinated. On the other hand, it gives these people the appearance of pursuing something noble. Instead of being presented as saboteurs, they are presented as individuals fighting for their rights. When they are presented as saboteurs, which I think is accurate, we're told they're a political problem that the president has yet to figure out a way to solve. But the presumption of freedom as choice does something else. It obscures the lawlessness of GOP leaders and their allies. The press corps has been busy reporting noble individuals fighting nobly for their noble rights. In fact, they have been undermining basic law and order. Texas and Florida have led the way in outlawing mask and vaccine mandates by local officials, especially on school boards. Meanwhile, Republican resistance nationally has sparked a crime wave. A teacher in California was attacked by a parent over masks. The same thing is playing out in schools across the country. A man was stabbed and a reporter assaulted in Los Angeles during a vaccine protest. That's how I got here. The photo illustrating the article was the stabbing during the vaccine protest. But the vaccine protest was really a Proud Boys rally, you see. So this became a shift in topic after all. But, well worth it. Good to point this out. An Iowa man was sentenced to a decade in prison over a mask fight. Medical workers are facing more violence and threats of violence. Same thing for flight attendants. Airlines are now refusing to serve booze because first-class passengers so often get belligerent. All classes probably. Elected office holders are receiving record numbers of death threats. A woman attacked a laundry worker in New York City over a request to wear a mask. Employees everywhere are being assaulted for doing their jobs. According to the Associated Press, across the country, anti-vaccine and anti-mask demonstrations are taking scary and violent turns. And educators, medical professionals, and public figures have been stunned at the level at which they've been vilified for even stating their opinion. and they have been terrified over how far protesters will go in confronting leaders outside their homes and in their workplaces. It bears repeating that we are not facing a public health crisis. We have vaccines. They work. They are free. They are available pretty much everywhere now. What's preventing us from ending the pandemic isn't medical. It's behavioral. It's violence. What's driving that is the GOP. What we need is for these people to get in line for the sake of their freedom and everyone else's. What we need is basic law and order. But the press corps is so focused on freedom as choice, not responsibility, that no one is talking about a violent Republican crime wave. It's almost like it's not a crime if it's conservative white people doing it. There's the rub. If black and brown people were attacking flight attendants and laundry workers and school teachers, we would hear no end from the Washington press corps about the threats to basic law and order, and from elected leaders about the need to crack down on crime. Among the news media's presumptions is the one about black and brown people being violent on account of being black and brown. Conservative white people aren't naturally violent, so when they are, there must be a good reason, like fighting for their rights. Well, there is no good reason. There is no reason at all except perhaps refusing to be held accountable to the same standards, the same laws as black and brown people are held. Lawlessness shouldn't be a regrettable outcome of liberty. It sure as hell shouldn't be the point. Okay, interesting. Well put. A little bit of a shoehorn to get that one in there. But now that we're running out of time, it's time to get back around to the Facebook stuff that's been lingering. I keep telling you it's been a bad week for them. And let's scroll down and see if we can't find all the fun things that we put aside here. There are a couple different angles on this. And let's see. We'll see where it begins. Might take some more scrolling. But, okay. Well, there's definitely a couple of weird and interesting reports. And I think maybe this one might be the first entree into it. From the New York Times, no more apologies. Inside Facebook's push to defend its image. Mark Zuckerberg, you know him, chief executive, has signed off on an effort to show users pro-Facebook stories and to distance himself from scandals. And there's been a lot about this, and I wonder if this is the one where I first read about the... now I remember, and I'll have to dig this one up. And the reason it didn't occur to me right away is that I linked to, or I pocketed the tweet from Patrick Snyder about this, and so it doesn't show up with a picture, and it's hard to find in the scan. So I'll scroll all the way back and find out about it. But let me set the stage, perhaps, with this New York Times piece. Ryan Mack and Shira Frenkel from September 21st. Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook's chief executive, signed off last month on a new initiative codenamed Project Amplify. The effort, which was hatched at an internal meeting in January, had a specific purpose: to use Facebook's news feed, the site's most important digital real estate, to show people positive stories about the social network. I guess he learned a little something from how he was used by the Trump campaign. The idea was that pushing pro-Facebook news items, some of them written by the company, would improve its image in the eyes of its users. 3 people with knowledge of the effort said, and it would probably work, yes. But the move was sensitive because Facebook had not previously positioned the news feed as a place where it burnished its own reputation. Several executives at the meeting were shocked by the proposal. One attendee said, Project Amplify punctuated a series of decisions that Facebook has made this year to aggressively reshape its image. Since that January meeting, the company has begun a multi-pronged effort to change its narrative by distancing Mr. Zuckerberg from scandals, reducing outsiders' access to internal data, burying a potentially negative report about its content, and increasing its own advertising to showcase its brand. The moves amount to a broad shift in strategy. For years, Facebook confronted crisis after crisis over privacy, misinformation, and hate speech on its platform by publicly apologizing. Mr. Zuckerberg personally took responsibility for Russian interference on the site during the 2016 presidential election and has loudly stood up for free speech online. Facebook also promised transparency into the way that it operated. But the drumbeat of criticism on issues as varied as racist speech and vaccine misinformation has not relented. Disgruntled Facebook employees have added to the furor by speaking out against their employer and leaking internal documents, some of which are in the story that Patrick sent to us. So we'll get to that later. Last week, the Wall Street Journal published articles based on such documents that showed Facebook knew about many of the harms it was causing. So, Facebook executives, concluding that their methods had done little to quell criticism or win supporters, decided early this year to go on the offensive, said 6 current and former employees who declined to be identified for fear of reprisal. They're realizing that no one is going to come to their defense, so they need to do it and say it themselves, said Katie Harbath, a former Facebook public policy director. The changes have involved Facebook executives from its marketing, communications, policy, and integrity teams. Alex Schultz, a 14-year company veteran who was named chief marketing officer last year, has also been influential in the image reshaping effort, said 5 people who worked with him. But at least one of the decisions was driven by Mr. Zuckerberg, and all were approved by him, 3 of the people said. Joe Osborne, a Facebook spokesman, denied that the company had changed its approach. People deserve to know the steps we're taking to address the different issues facing our company, and we're going to share those steps widely, he said in a statement. Sounds reasonable. For years, Facebook executives have chafed at how their company appeared to receive more scrutiny than Google and Twitter, said current and former employees. They attributed that attention to Facebook's leaving itself more exposed with its apologies and providing access to internal data, the people said. So, in January, executives held a virtual meeting and broached the idea of a more aggressive defense. One attendee said, the group discussed using the news feed to promote positive news about the company, as well as running ads that linked to favorable articles about Facebook, of which there are none. They also debated how to define a pro-Facebook story, 2 participants said. That same month, the communications team discussed ways for executives to be less conciliatory when responding to crises and decided there would be less apologizing, said 2 people with knowledge of the plan. That they did learn from Trump. Zuckerberg, who has become entwined with policy issues including the 2020 election, also wanted to recast himself as an innovator, the people said. Why not? In January, the communications team circulated a document with a strategy for distancing Zuckerberg from scandals, partly by focusing on his Facebook posts and media appearances on new products, they said. The Information, a tech news site. The Information, that's the name of a tech news site. Previously reported on the document, the impact was immediate. On January 11th, Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook's chief operating officer, and not Mr. Zuckerberg, told Reuters that the storming of the U.S. Capitol a week earlier had little to do with Facebook. In July, when President Biden said the social network was killing people by spreading COVID-19 misinformation, Guy Rosen, Facebook's vice president for integrity, disputed the characterization in a blog post and pointed out that the White House had missed its coronavirus vaccination goals, which not really relevant or helpful, but okay. Facebook is not the reason this goal was missed, Mr. Rosen wrote. Depends. Zuckerberg's personal Facebook and Instagram accounts soon changed. Rather than addressing corporate controversies, Zuckerberg's posts have recently featured a video of himself riding across a lake carrying an American flag, with messages about new virtual reality and hardware devices. After this article, which described Zuckerberg as riding an electric surfboard, which is probably not a great idea, was published, he wrote on Facebook that it was actually a hydrofoil that I'm pumping with my own legs. Okay. No one really hears about that. Facebook also started cutting back on the availability of data that allowed academics and journalists to study how the platform worked. In April, the company told its team behind CrowdTangle, a tool that provides data on the engagement and popularity of Facebook posts, that it was being broken up. While the tool still exists, the people who worked on it were moved to other teams. Part of the impetus came from Mr. Schultz, who had grown frustrated with news coverage that used CrowdTangle data to show that Facebook was spreading misinformation, said two people involved in the discussion. So CrowdTangle's data actually demonstrated something, so we better get rid of it. Okay, that sounds like very Facebook-ish. Well, okay, we'll finish up with this article and then move on to the more interesting and sinister sounding one.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's see. Still so much to get through here, but let me keep reading and keep an eye on the other thread I wanted to read you and some other comments that deserve some answers. Let's see. Where were we here? For academics who relied on CrowdTangle, remember that? It was a blow. Cameron Hickey, a misinformation researcher, that's a confusing field, at the National Conference on Citizenship, a nonprofit focused on civic engagement, said he was particularly angry because he felt the CrowdTangle team was being punished for giving an unfiltered view of engagement on Facebook. Mr. Schultz argued that Facebook should publish its own information about the site's most popular content rather than supply access to tools like CrowdTangle, the two people said. So, in June, the company compiled a report on Facebook's most viewed posts for the first 3 months of 2021, but Facebook did not release the report. After the policy communications team discovered that the top viewed link for the period was a news story with a headline that suggested a doctor had died after receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, they feared the company would be chastised for contributing to vaccine hesitancy, according to internal emails reviewed by the New York Times, which they would have been because they were. A day before the report was supposed to be published, Mr. Schultz was part of a group that voted to shelve the document, according to emails. He later posted an internal message about his role at Facebook, internal, yes, which was reviewed by the Times, saying, "I do care about protecting the company's reputation, but I also care deeply about rigor and transparency. I'm just not going to act on that." Facebook also worked to stamp out employee leaks. In July, the communications team shuttered comments on an internal forum that was used for company-wide announcements. "Our one request, please don't leak," read a post about the change, which obviously only reached the press because it was leaked. At the same time, Facebook ramped up its marketing. During the Olympics this summer, the company paid for television spots with the tagline, "We change the game when we find each other," to promote how it fostered communities. In the first half of this year, Facebook spent a record $6.1 billion on marketing and sales, up more than 8% from a year earlier, according to a recent earnings report. Weeks later, the company further reduced the ability of academics to conduct research on it when it disabled the Facebook accounts and pages of a group of New York University researchers. The researchers had created a feature for web browsers that allowed them to see users' Facebook activity, which 16,000 people had consented to use. The resulting data had led to studies showing that misleading political ads had thrived on Facebook during the 2020 election and that users engaged more with right-wing misinformation than many other types of content. In a blog post, Facebook said the NYU researchers had violated rules around collecting user data, citing a privacy agreement that it originally struck with the FTC in 2012. The FTC later admonished Facebook for invoking its agreement, saying it allowed for good faith research in the public interest. Laura Edelson, The lead NYU researcher said Facebook cut her off because of the negative attention her work brought. Some people at Facebook look at the effect of these transparency efforts and all they see is bad PR, she said. The episode was compounded this month when Facebook told misinformation researchers that it had mistakenly provided incomplete data on user interactions and engagement for 2 years for their work. It is inconceivable that most of modern life as it exists on Facebook isn't analyzable by researchers, said Nathaniel Persily, a Stanford University law professor who is working on federal legislation to force the company to share data with academics. In August, after Mr. Zuckerberg approved Project Amplify, the company tested the change in 3 U.S. cities. Two people with knowledge of the effort said, while the company had previously used the news feed to promote its own products and social causes, it had not turned to it to openly push positive press about itself, they said. Once the tests began, Facebook used a system known as Quick Promotes to place stories about people and organizations that use the social network into users' news feeds, they said. People essentially see posts with a Facebook logo that link to stories and websites published by the company and from third-party local news sites. One story pushed Facebook's latest innovations for 2021 and discussed how it was achieving 100% renewable energy for our global operations. This is a test for an informational unit clearly marked as coming from Facebook, Mr. Osborne said, adding that Project Amplify was similar to corporate responsibility initiatives people see in other technology and consumer products. Facebook's defiance against unflattering revelations has also not let up, even without Mr. Zuckerberg. On Saturday, Nick Clegg, the company's vice president for global affairs, wrote a blog post denouncing the premise of the journal investigation. He said the idea that Facebook executives had repeatedly ignored warnings about problems was just plain false. These stories have contained deliberate mischaracterizations of what we're trying to do, Mr. Clegg said. He did not detail what the mischaracterizations were. That wraps that up, but brings us to, as I said, the more sinister story pointed to by Patrick Snyder, who sends us all sorts of interesting items for inclusion. Before I get there, I just want to quickly address something Rebecca Romans had sent here, asking, is this true? It is the tweet from No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, with whom I'm not familiar, but a podcast covering the top stories and interviews with the biggest names in politics, and I'm still not familiar. And, well, it says right in the title, it's no lie, so yeah, it's true. There you go. What was it that we were asking about? This news. New, because it's news. Speaker Pelosi is now suggesting that the debt ceiling doesn't actually need to be raised. Why? Because the 14th Amendment says the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. Therefore, the debt ceiling is unconstitutional as a requirement. Is it true? It is true that the Constitution has such a provision, yes. And it's true that it's also something that Armando has brought up in the past and said, well, you know, the 14th Amendment does include this provision, and it may have the effect of, well, any number of things. Either, one, invalidating the need for a statutory increase in the debt limit, as Speaker Pelosi says, although I'm not, I don't know exactly in what context she said this, and it might be the case that she says, well, there's a theory that says that exists as a backup, but it's not been the practice of the Congress. Or it may be, well, yeah, it exists out there. We prefer to handle it statutorily, and it's never been a problem before, but I'm not too worried because something, or it may just be, well, some people theorize this. So not by any means a settled issue. It's never been tested. And the results of, the upshot of the 14th Amendment, Section 4, the validity of the public debt of the United States, authorized by law, including debts incurred. That's a problem. Including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion shall not be questioned. But neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss of emancipation of any slave, but all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void. So you see there's a larger context to what's in the 14th Amendment, and it calls into question, let's say, the breadth of the claim that it simply means that the public debt shall not be questioned. I mean, that's a pretty important ellipsis possibly there. The original intent, perhaps, of the 14th Amendment was that you can't question public debt taken on essentially for the purposes of fighting the Civil War, and neither would states that rejoin the Union after losing the Civil War have their debts incurred for their own prosecution of the Civil War. Those won't be honored by the United States, though. Right? So we're not going to assume Southern states' debts. As I read it here, I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding, neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States. Okay, so that makes some good sense. So, one, you could say that that might limit the scope of the applicability, and saying, well, most of this debt wasn't incurred for those reasons, so I'm not sure it's covered. Then, of course, there's also that phrase in the middle there, that little bit that says the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts for blah, 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 blah. So authorized by law, is that sort of why we statutorily raise the debt ceiling, so that we can say, well, this debt has been authorized by law, and so therefore won't be questioned. So there's some limitation on it. It's not entirely clear what it means or how it would be interpreted, and you don't want to leave anything in the hands of the Supreme Court if you don't have to. That's what I would say to that. But there are certainly some people who have said, as a last resort backup, yeah, they might be able to claim that and get away with it. And I don't know whether the people who thought it at first still believe that the Supreme Court would allow it, or whether they too would be afraid of the collapse of the worldwide economic order and allow it to apply. I have no answer for you on that one. All right, let's see. I wanted to move to the other Facebook story. Again, thanks to Patrick Snyder for sending me, as he comments here, the long detailed thread about the new lawsuit against Facebook, another part of their bad week. This all tweeted and reported to us by Jason Kint. Who is Jason Kint? Let's investigate. He is the CEO of DC Norg, the Digital Content Next organization, as he calls it. Created duopoly slide 6 years ago. I don't know what that means, but antitrust pending. Media strategy is, I guess, his place. And I don't know. I don't know anything about Jason Kint, but this is really an interesting thread. So here we go. Oops, I've lost it already. Back to Patrick's tweet so that I can pick it up again. He starts off, Jason does, with 3 exclamation points and then news. Mother of all lawsuits quietly filed last month versus Facebook in Delaware. You know, the capital, the world capital, certainly the United States capital of corporate litigation. I'll explain why it avoided notice until now in a bit, but Zuckerberg, Sandberg, the CFO, board, and the board, including Peter Thiel and Palantir, are defendants in this lawsuit. It's a result of sealed documents between Facebook executives and the board. So lots of names here among the defendants, and none of them are famous enough for me to recognize, although, well, you know, there are some actually. Mark Zuckerberg, of course. Sheryl Sandberg, yeah. Peggy Alford, maybe you guys know. Peggy Alford. Mark Andreessen. That looks familiar. Andreessen. Kenneth Chenault. Peter Thiel, that name I've heard before. Jeffrey Zients. Now, Erskine Bowles, I had no idea was on the board of Facebook, but wow, that's bad news, just in general. Susan Desmond Hellman, Reed Hastings, Jan Koum, Koum, Konstantinos Papamiltiadis, I guess. There we go. David Fisher and Michael Schroepfer and David Weiner, Wehner, and Facebook Incorporated, all included in this suit. So what is this suit? It's actually quite interesting. Let's go on into it here. Jason continues. Major new plaintiff allegations, many long concerning. One, FB, Facebook spent billions of dollars. This is really interesting. This is actually, I guess, a shareholder derivative suit, which explains why they may have chosen Delaware as their forum. A shareholder derivative suit. Essentially, we're talking about shareholders, stock owners, shareholders in Facebook challenging the way Facebook is governing itself and doing its business, and presumably wasting money that could otherwise have been part of a larger dividend for them, and therefore taking money out of their pockets because they've been acting improperly. How so? Facebook spent billions of dollars, apparently, to protect Zuckerberg personally. It also claims epic corporate governance breakdown and adds a list of insider trading defendants and documents Zuckerberg having misled Congress. How interesting is that? It's a whopping 390 pages, this lawsuit, and there is a related 220-page suit filed in the same court on the same day. Together, they bring the kitchen sink on allegations as to how the platform gained market power, failed its 2012 FTC consent decree, covered up and failed to disclose data harms. Now, as background, Jason now begins, the state of Rhode Island originally had sued Facebook, claiming it way overpaid the Federal Trade Commission by as much as $4.9 billion to protect Zuckerberg. That is to say that there was legal action threatened by the Federal Trade Commission that opened up Zuckerberg to some significant liability, and that instead Facebook opted to settle the case rather than pursue it in court, even though they had to pay billions of dollars to do it. They did it so that Zuckerberg wouldn't face the possibility of personal liability, which is a really serious issue for the board to be doing that, to waste shareholders' money, that's why they're suing, on overpaying, settling without any contention whatsoever on behalf of the company, taking company money, essentially, to pay the FTC to make them go away. FTC is satisfied. They get their settlement. But some of that liability maybe should have fallen directly on Zuckerberg himself. But rather than allow him to pay out of pocket, he, essentially, it's alleged, directed the board to direct that the company settle. Even though it was terribly detrimental for the company, it was also, it saved Zuckerberg's neck. And that's kind of a no-no. So, as background, we say, State of Rhode Island originally sued Facebook, claiming it way overpaid the Federal Trade Commission by as much as almost $5 billion to protect Zuckerberg. It won, the state did, the rights to inspect a lot of documents from between 2013 and 2019, leading to this new lawsuit, which draws on a ton of evidence from all over the place. There's a couple of screen grabs and some highlighted sections here. Let's see what it has to say here. One highlight from the claim: certain of Facebook's internal board minutes, board level materials, and email communications obtained through an action pursuant to Delaware law, I won't bother citing it, seeking the inspection of company books and records, which was successfully prosecuted by plaintiffs in the case of In Re Facebook Incorporated. So that's where they got their materials. That was not that important to know, but okay. The central allegation kicking off this is the FTC's draft settlement naming Zuckerberg personally, which would have caused all sorts of issues for him. The board, entirely controlled by Zuckerberg, that's the important part, refused and paid $5 billion to protect him so that the FTC wouldn't name him personally. Here, another screen grab from the complaint. Specifically, when the FTC pursued personal accountability for defendant Zuckerberg for the data and privacy abuses, the board demurred, categorically refusing to negotiate any settlement that included personal liability for Zuckerberg. And where it becomes a problem is, okay, well, obviously, people who are on the board who are friends of Zuckerberg and making a ton of money due to Zuckerberg's, friendliness with them, don't want to jeopardize their spots on the board, and that comes up too. But essentially, the question is, should we do this thing which is a lot worse for the company than we might otherwise be expected to end up on if we went to court, but a lot better for Zuckerberg personally? Should we take company money and pay this so that we don't have to litigate this thing, even though if we did litigate it, we could get the number reduced, just so Zuckerberg doesn't have any personal liability? And again, as I say, that's a problem for corporate governance. You're stealing out of the pockets, allegedly, this is what the complaint says, stealing out of the pockets of the shareholders so that Zuckerberg, who has more money than God, doesn't have to pay anything to anybody, even though the FTC says he should. The allegations, Jason continues, in his new derivative lawsuit upon seeing the board docs is that all of this is a result of the lawsuit. All of this is a result of the lawsuit calls, or what the lawsuit, I guess, calls, an epic governance failure. More on that in a minute. The original suit, of course, was filed due to Cambridge Analytica. Remember them? The new lawsuit has more details than anything I've seen. Many are sealed. Reminder, case centers on millions of stolen and sold Facebook users' data. According to the suit, only 0.31% of the people whose data was stolen and sold had consented to it being shared. You remember what Cambridge Analytica was up to, more or less, right? As Zuckerberg's close buddy, Bosworth, I don't know who Bosworth is, but as he helped broadcast at the time, Facebook claimed it wasn't a breach or a hack because the systems were designed and known to work the way they did. The platform was the hack, but of course, a reminder, Facebook doesn't sell your data, except it turns out that they actually do. Bosworth, by the way, is Facebook mobile advertising executive Andrew Bosworth, who tweeted about the thing that this was not a hack and it wasn't a data breach. Cambridge Analytica had no need to hack Facebook to obtain the vast amounts of personal data and information used. The individual defendants allowed, it says here, Kogan, I guess, from Cambridge Analytica, to harvest vast amounts of personal user information from Facebook without user consent and sell that information to Cambridge Analytica. But he's not Facebook. Facebook doesn't sell your data. We just give it to people who do. As we learned in earlier discovery from the Attorney General of D.C., combined with pressure and hearings from the UK, employees knew about Cambridge Analytica. They called it sketchy even before The Guardian, the newspaper, brought their attention to it. Here is another reference to knowledge which was confirmed by the UK Data Commissioner, too. And you might remember, this is more screen grabs on all of this, but you might remember another AOC reference here. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez famously asked about the knowledge and awareness of this data breach and the theft of this information by Cambridge Analytica in a hearing in late 2019, causing Zuckerberg to appear to stumble on his answer to keep his story straight. And it was politically sensitive. Jason continues, a fall 2020 Channel 4 news documentary even reported and uncovered more details on how the data was used
for voter suppression and micro-targeting in key battleground states. But that, he says, is for a different thread. With the screen grab again illustrating here, Cambridge Analytica used data from Facebook to design target audiences for digital ads and for fundraising appeals, model voter turnout, determine where television ads should be bought, and determine where President Trump should travel to best drum up support. Now, Jason, again, this lawsuit even includes the fact that Facebook hired one of the co-founders of the company that mined and sold the Facebook data to Cambridge Analytica at a sensitive time. His entire tenure in existence is still a deep mystery in all of this, but good to see in the lawsuit. Again, the screen grab here, which says Facebook refused to give evidence to the UK inquiry, but as the UK Disinformation Report noted, Joseph Chancellor, director of GSR, the organization responsible for the platform application that shared user information with Cambridge Analytica, was hired by Facebook as a quantitative researcher on the user experience research team within 2 months of his leaving the purportedly, quote, sketchy company. That seems kind of weird. And again, Jason continues, this lawsuit isn't about politics, but instead antitrust, governance, and SEC-related failures. A reminder to the antitrust matters, one core allegation is Facebook accelerated its shift to mobile leveraging data reciprocity deals. That doesn't make a great deal of sense to me, but it's very much in there too. And again, a screen grab proving that. We know this from previously unsealed emails and messages, which showed the constructs of cutting off data feeds to apps that were seen as competitive threats or weren't willing to provide revenues for Facebook. Again, ladies and gentlemen, they didn't sell your data, right? That's always the claim. Facebook doesn't sell your data, but apparently they will allow third-party app developers to steal your data and sell that data, but only so long as they cut Facebook in on the profits. We don't sell your data. We give it to data brokers who sell it and then pay us a percentage. A hat tip at this point, Jason says, to the UK Parliament, specifically Member of Parliament Damian Collins, who really led the world in uncovering as much of the details here, either through accountability pressure and leaked documents, as they tried to get Facebook leadership to answer questions at hearings. The highlighted parts of this screen grab, by the way, Zuckerberg's statement that we've never sold anyone's data is simply untrue. It seems clear that Facebook was at the very least in violation of its Federal Trade Commission settlement. From the documents we received, it is evident that Facebook intentionally and knowingly violated both data privacy and anti-competition laws. That's the conclusion of the UK Investigatory Committee. There's a lot in the lawsuit around Facebook's failure to honor its 2012 consent decree. This includes sealed sections that at least appear to suggest that the board and leadership never even reviewed required PricewaterhouseCoopers, right? PwC audits, or connected any dots to Cambridge Analytica. Speaking of PricewaterhouseCoopers, this is new to me, Jason says. It appears they did an investigation in 2019 after everything hit the fan for Facebook, but their engagement was ended before the report was finalized. Says here, there's a note, 220 documents are board materials turned over as part of the original suit. Of course, let's get to this before we leave. Zuckerberg's control of the board is not new and is drawn on separate class of stock negotiated with the assistance of the current board member, Mark Andreessen, whose name came up before, right? He controls voting power, that is to say, Zuckerberg. He even controls the nominating committee to the board among allies. So the idea that the board was, acting on his behalf, but it wasn't him who did these things. It was these other totally separate people who make decisions like, let's settle this case rather than risk personal liability for Mark. No, it doesn't work that way. The lawsuit allegations claim this results in a board where directors are ousted regularly and are mostly in some way conflicted in their relationships to the leader or to the company. There is a lot in these pages on this issue. The lawsuit also claims that Congress calls defendant Zuckerberg to question and is met with dishonesty. regarding false and misleading answers to Congress. I've documented these concerns in threads previously, but good to see these claims going before the court. Testimony, Zuckerberg regularly claimed users maintain control over their data, but there are several pages of examples in the lawsuit where he says this. But the New York Times reported Facebook was actually whitelisting companies to still receive user data through and after his testimony. Zuckerberg and Facebook also made a big deal about how they reacted quickly in 2015 when they found out, supposedly from press reports, what Cambridge Analytica was doing, including implying that they scrambled to get legal certification that the data was deleted. But guess what? Not so much. Well, there's actually quite a bit more in this thread. Took a lot longer to read through than I thought. I recommend it to you for a weekend reading, because we'll probably be returning to this topic when Facebook has another bad week.
NetworksRadio.com.
That might even be next week.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
True enough, and if you keep listening, which you should, we hope that Justice Putnam will be joining us, maybe with some new content today after the show, but we'll see. He's going to try and eke one out, but hey, give him a break if he can't make it there. The guy's got COVID, but is on the mend. Thanks to the chicken soup folks that showed up at his house, too.